Hey guys, I have a new guest with me this week. His name is Lindsay Law. I actually love that name. That's amazing. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. How are you? How are you today?
Very good today. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We have a lot of great things to talk about. You do have a new book out, which is really inspiring. And we're getting to know a little bit more about you in this process and actually some really great questions along the way. But first, I want to get a little bit of background because I know you have a huge background in television and film and theater. Kind of what inspired you to transition to keep writing your novel, but also, I guess, was your past experience something that really helps you influence your writing style for the book?
Yes, as a producer, I was a producer of television programs and then a producer of films. And then eventually I was even a producer on Broadway. But in all those guises, you're working with writers and directors and you're basically making judgments about material and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's someone else's material. Someone else invented it, a playwright or screenwriter. And it was my job to bring their dream to fruition, to bring their script to life.
Right.
I enjoyed doing that. I did that for decades. But I, at a certain point, I suddenly thought I'd like to tell my stories, the stories that I knew best and clearest and firsthand. Stories of people, friends of mine, stories of events I'd lived through, etc. And so to do that requires a full-time commitment also, the same way producing did. And so I waited until all those careers ended. And I retired. And I suddenly found myself with this wonderful stream of time in front of me. So I thought, okay, let's start. So I just began writing 5 or 6 hours every day, 5 or 6 days a week.
Wow, that's amazing.
Sorting through what I wanted to tell you. And you wonder, do I have anything to say? What's it going to be about? And so you play with it. You just start writing. And you eventually find out, and people who don't write never believe this, but when you start writing, the characters actually take over. They actually quite often decide where they're going. You don't decide. You put two characters in a room, let's say, and it's a scene and they're having, I don't know, let's say they're having a fight or something and you're inventing dialogue for them to say. Eventually they just start talking.
Wow.
And it's quite wonderfully odd. And you'll know when you've hit a wrong note. You'll when something is false. Being able to determine a false note as a writer is a very valuable skill. And I think I'm pretty good at it, actually. And I think it just came from years of working with other writers. And I taught screenwriting also at Yale. So that was, again, to be able to do that, you're really studying, how does this happen? How does this work? Why does this work? And so, I was well prepared for life as a novelist because I'd been working with so many other writers on their craft.
Yeah, that must have been a great experience. And so much, like you said, you've learned from other people and being in that world and also understanding it and kind of now taking your ownage of it. I mean, Yale must have been amazing. I mean, to do screenwriting there, that must have been such a great experience. You know, I can only imagine some of the things that come out of that.
Yes. Yeah. They were smart, talented kids. So that was nice.
So the book is called, correct me if I'm wrong, the Orphan from Shakespeare's Keep. Is that the name of the book?
Shepard's Keep.
Shepard's Keep. Thank you.
Yeah.
And what is it overall? You know, we'll go deep dive into it, but just give us a quick synopsis of what the book is about.
It's set over a period of 30 years. It follows three main characters, three men, and one of them from birth. And you follow their lives over the next 30 years and the adventures that happen to them. They fall in and out of love with each other. And two of them, it begins in Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. One of the characters, however, moves to Europe partway through the story. And he travels around Europe. He's no longer with the other two. Anyway, it's a story. It's a love story, but it's a love story between a variety of different men. And it goes through It starts in the 80s, and it takes us right through this terrible time of carnage, as Donald Trump referred to it. It takes it all the way up to his administration, unfortunately. But that figures into the story in a big way.
Yeah.
Because COVID strikes at the end of the novel.
Okay. Wow.
So yes, we're following the lives of these three people, and they're three very different people. The young one, the main character, the orphan, is actually a countertenor, which is a very high soprano voice in a male. And they exist through training, and also you need some breaks in terms of your body, in terms of your vocal cords. Not everyone can be a countertenor, but that's one character. The other one is a neighbor of his who's just, basically no good, and he's a troublemaker, and he's delightful. And then
some of the best ones are.
Exactly. And then there's a third character who becomes a policeman, and he tries to save the troublemaker, because the troublemaker starts slipping down into drugs and bad behavior.
Wow. That's amazing.
So we watched these three men over 30 years.
That's amazing.
As friendships change over time, as they help one another, hate one another, love one another.
Yeah. So
yes, it's and in the end, it's. I mean, friends tell me, and the reviews I've seen, people. One of my favorite quote actually is, "The book broke my heart." So it's people really end up seeing themselves in these characters and really hoping these characters are well and will survive.
That's amazing.
That's a good thing to hear back from people.
I love that. And, was this a challenge for you to go through, as you said, it spans their lifetime? Was it very challenging to really think of the decades and kind of play into those things and kind of see how that evolution has changed and reminiscing things that happened throughout history? Was that such a challenge for you? Or was something that kind of came like, oh, wow, like kind of remember this thing and putting that into the story? How was that journey for you?
It was actually fairly easy. I would decide, okay, we're going to jump forward now, however many years. And yes, you would have to check historically what's happened to make sure that you're not putting events in the wrong years.
Right.
But that didn't get in my way. That was actually fairly easy. It was the characters and their growth. And what you're like as a 25-year-old is different than you as a 30-year-old is different than you as a 35-year-old. It was those leaps that I had to track more carefully. The events of what was true and going on around them. I mean, one of them ends up in Eastern Europe and in a country that was once a satellite of Russia. And I was having to constantly check the dates to see when certain events took place and whatever, so I didn't misstep there. But it's interesting because, I mean, with Google, I mean, you can check anything and everything. I would every now and then suddenly think, wow, if I'd been writing this at a different period in time, I would have had to make a million trips to the library, and I would have had to spend hours with, reference books trying to figure out stuff. And of course, these days we just take for granted how easy it is to just go on and type in.
That's so true.
Google. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but still amazing. I think, that plays to, obviously, hopefully into your story as well, too, is like those historical events that happen. And like you said, seeing this evolution of change happen and really having people really connect to the story. I think that's really great. Some of the best stories I've always enjoyed and loved is just seeing those kind of period pieces, but also how those things have changed over time and how you kind of relate to like, oh, this is when this happened, which I think is probably happening nowadays with COVID and current administration and certain things that are happening in our world today. It's kind of, and we'll probably see a lot of that boom, in the next couple of years and see how that kind of transpires, which has obviously happened throughout history as well, too. So, but to be a part of that, it's got to be kind of exciting, even though it's tragedy.
I agree. I think stories that take place over time, watching characters that you meet and then you tend to like them, let's say, and then see what happens to them. I like, because of course we can't do that in real life.
No.
I can't suddenly look at you and see you in 5 years from now. I can't. I don't have that ability.
So we're not fortune tellers.
No, exactly. So it's fun to be able to do that and when you tell fiction. And basically, I wanted to do this primarily because as a young man, I wished a book like this had existed for me to read. These are
Yes.
three gay men. They're three positive portrayals. The book isn't about being gay at all. The book is about these three men
Yeah.
and of the many qualities they have. One of them is that they are gay.
Mm.
But it doesn't define them. It isn't the only thing that exists that is true about them.
Right.
And growing up, there were no novels like this. And the
Yeah.
few times there were gay characters in any of the books I was reading, they were very sad, depressed people, and quite often by
Um,
the end of the novel, they'd committed suicide. So
yeah.
I mean, it's like enough of this. This is positive
It's so true.
portrayals of
Yeah.
people is a huge, and it's happening all around us. Luckily these days,
Yeah.
it's a huge game changer because 20
Yeah.
years ago this wasn't true.
Yeah. And then, it's no disrespect to the ideal of what happened, because I mean, that is history and this has happened. But I do agree with you that at some point we need to start seeing some more positivity and seeing how this, their lives have changed and how we have a better representation and seeing that you can be happy, you can have this life, it can be something for you.
Yes,
And it has to be such, like you said, the storyline of the gay bashing or the you're lonely and like you're going to be alone the rest of your life. It's like that's not everyone's story, and people are living their lives and being happy. And even in their older generations, there are, and I had a chance to sit and talk with people in my older generation who are also gay and part of the community, and they're doing amazing and they're just happy, but for some reason we have to feel like, as maybe as artists or as a storyteller, you have to feel like, oh, I have to have some so tortured, I have to do this and that. It's like,
right.
okay, enough of that. Like we get it. We understand. It's not easy, but
Happy's not a
there's
bad.
right. It's like happiness does happen. You can find this. So I love that. That's so refreshing that you talked about that and you have that. The relationships in your novel, particularly between, we were talking about this off the podcast, between Eli, Ferris, and Benjamin, are the central plot. But can you divulge or dive into the complexities of these relationships and how they evolved over the years? And you talked a little bit about how they went through their struggles, but really, how did they really connect? Because it's so hard nowadays to find friendships that are that long. I mean, I'd like to sadly say some friendships last maybe 2 or 3, 4 years. There's college, there's life, whatever the case is, but it's rare that you see friendships nowadays and that are that long and that you keep these friendships for over decades. So how was that?
It was the thing that was fun to look into was that the two of the characters, Ferris and Eli, they meet when Eli is 15 and Ferris is 18, so they're
Okay.
very young.
Yeah.
And as one of the characters explains to the other, he said, first loves make larger demands on you than anything else in your life. And even though they may be years in the past, that
Right.
first love, it's memorable.
Yeah.
Memorable good and memorable bad. And so these two of these characters, one of them, although time has moved on and he has actually, because it's allowed, because that happens in the book, that gay marriage becomes possible.
Mm-hmm.
He's married to the third character, but he still has the crush he has on Eli is still very much with him. And we're not even sure when Eli returns home, we're not sure what's actually going to happen because he's dreamed of this boy for years just because he was the first one he ever loved. And he loves his husband very much. But at the same time, he's intrigued to see what's happened to this young man from his past. So yes, it's how does one maintain relationships in a healthy, good way? And they go through these three people go through years when they're not in touch, and then they are in touch. And yes, it's a challenge for all of them.
Stay together. Yeah.
The rewards are great if you put in the work. And when COVID finally strikes, the only thing they can depend on when they're suddenly in lockdown is the love they have for one another. That's the only true thing that's going on, because everything else is a lie. I mean, you've got a president who's telling you, you just go drink a little bleach and you'll be fine.
Oh, gosh. Did not forget that. Yes.
Right, left, and center. So the only thing they can depend on, the only truth they can depend on, is each other. And so that really helps solidify the love that they have for one another.
Yeah, and again, you said it's so true too. It's I think even my own friendships and relationships and friendships I've made, it's, you may not always be together. You may not be in the same place or time, but you always keep in contact. You always find ways to connect one another. And I think that's important to mention too, because some people think that when you're friends for so long, you have to be talking constantly for years. Like that isn't always the case, you just may not be as close in certain years, but then it doesn't mean it changes your relationships. It doesn't change how you feel about this person. It's not kind of out of sight, out of mind. It's just how you maintain it. But it does take work too. It's not as simple as just saying like, oh, I have a friend from so-and-so, but do you call them? Do you check in? Yeah. So it's, I'm sure throughout these characters' lives, they had, like you mentioned, they have that, but they've always found a way to stay connected and grounded. And I think that's so beautiful that that's happened, because you don't see that very often. Some people just kind of give up on life. I think, at least in my generation, at least, it's some people just out of sight, out of mind. But I do also agree COVID was a part too for a lot of people and friendships and connectivity, that people found a way to reconnect and really come together in such a trying and difficult time in life. I mean, me and my friends, we were at one point not speaking as much, and then we used to have a Zoom call, and then we would just like talk all the time, and we still have done this to this day since COVID.
Yeah,
and it's brought us probably closer than we ever probably were before. We were friends for years, but because we all were going through that at the same time, we were all kind of reeling on that and really connecting on that level. And I think it's made our friendship even stronger ever since then. And I'm so great. I hate to say I'm grateful for a pandemic to bring my friends together, but I hate to say that, but it's when those darkest times come, that's when real friendships, I think, really showcase themselves, and you really understand someone, and you really get to understand a true person's kind of motives and understandings through certain things.
Yes, that was one of the blessings to be found in that otherwise terrible period of time. But that was one of the blessings in terms of how it brought people together.
Absolutely. Your book explores themes of love, betrayal, and the evolving landscape of the LGBTQ rights in the United States. How did you balance these complex themes and create a narrative that reflects the character's struggles and triumphs? We talked a little bit about it, but how was that for you to really kind of talk about these things and kind of bring that friendship and still keep that cohesiveness going throughout the story when you have so many things that were happening in our community and things that are happening throughout time as well?
Interestingly, as you're writing, I rarely think on anything you just mentioned. And what I mean by that is,
I feel like I just went in and just wrote these characters.
No. But what I mean by that is that these are people that you create. They're not real, of course, they're characters, but they're based on something. And I think the eventual reader will see if it's a truthful character or not. And if it doesn't feel real to life, then you probably stop reading the book. And how to make it true to life is for me, is just having their behavior resemble the behavior that I've seen in other people, to make it meaning to mold these people onto the framework of friends of mine, things like that. And then you have, of course, the millions of stories in history, whether it's movies or books, you see what other authors have done, and yet you need yours to be completely original. And I wanted the only given was that I wanted these to be positive portrayals, and I wanted certainly there to be some happy endings to this. In terms of the thing that I've enjoyed hearing from people who've read the book is that they have no idea where it's going, and they don't know if this is going. They don't know, is this person going to be happy or is this person going to be happy? Is this going to end up well? Or is this going to end up poorly? But melding together various themes, I don't think about that as I'm writing. I'm hoping the characters will lead the way, and they will be the ones. They will be the ones who determine their own happiness. In essence, I've given them life, right? And I know that it sounds weird because these are inanimate objects; these are just characters in the book. These aren't real people. But at the same time, they are real people. They're real people in my mind, and I want them, of course, to become real people in your mind when you read it. And so they've got to have elements that we all recognize. And whether we admire those elements or whether we despise those elements, are what makes up a character.
And it also might be the connection that people have. Like they say, I do this a lot sometimes. It's like, this person reminds me of someone in my family or someone I know or a certain friend. And you're just kind of seeing those traits and you're like, maybe that's the connection. People are feeling like, I know this person. This is someone in my life that acts this way. And you're like, I see how this works. And it's that complexity and that's understanding of how that works. You're just kind of like, oh my God, this is how it goes.
And you've got to, as the creator of it, as the writer, you've got to be, I have to not worry that you're going to hate what I have this guy doing at a certain point. Otherwise, if they're just going to be a goody two-shoes the whole time, then you're not going to be all that interested in them. They've got to have elements of good and bad. And sometimes when they're going through a bad stretch, you have to be careful. I don't want the reader to suddenly think, "Ooh, I don't want to be near this guy." But at the same time, you've got to have some level of that to keep because our friends do that. We go in and out of like or love with our friends because they're suddenly doing something we don't agree with. That doesn't mean we're right or they're right, but it just means that's a period they're going through. And if we wait patiently through that friendship, conceivably they change, we change, our points of view change, the world around us changes. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And like I said, I'm with you on that. I love a character with an edge, and I love a character arc and growth. I think one of the things that always bugs me is when a character doesn't happen too often, but like sometimes you get characters who don't really evolve too much or grow, and maybe that's the way the novel's meant to be. Like there may be a sub character that's supposed to be that way, but I think if it's a main character, you should see some level of understanding, humility, but also some relatability to how things are going great, and all of a sudden, boom, it doesn't happen. Or how do they get back up from this? And I'm pretty sure with your characters, they kind of put you through the ringer and they really kind of gone through these ups and downs, as you mentioned before, like involved with drugs and then the law and maybe even learning from that. I think because at the same time, mistakes are made, but it's how you learn from those mistakes and how you don't repeat them and how you've learned to evolve from that and that you don't make those mistakes again, which is a human trait that everyone has. We're not perfect beings. Nor should we ever think we are, So
yes, and that's always a fine line in terms of creating these characters. Because again, we're just as you say, we are imperfect beings. And so some novels you read and the author's created someone who's perfect, and eventually it becomes boring.
Well, you're like, okay, that's not something I live up to. Like, okay, whatever,
I don't know anyone like that, so that I can't relate to that one. How nice for him or her that they're perfect, and never make a mistake. But it's mistakes that make, sometimes it's the mistakes we've made that have led us where we are. Sometimes it's the mistakes we've made that have made us more interesting as time goes on.
I totally agree with you.
We can't regret those. We can't regret those mistakes. Yeah.
No, I mean, you can look back and hope you don't do certain things again, but I think at some point
you don't want to repeat them. That's for sure.
Right. I do agree with you. Yeah, you find ways to like not be in that realm and try to get better about that. No, I think that's a great way. You talked about this a little bit. The book has received praises, as you mentioned, a lot with the characters and with being involved and really understanding and being like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Which I think every writer wants to hear about their stories and the characters. You receive praise for portraying the male friendships, which I think is really important too. Could you discuss the challenges and rewards of depicting these intimate connections between the characters, whether it be gay, straight, how does this, people in their lives, I think at the root of it, how does the male friendship work? Because we don't see too much work in understanding of that as much. We always see, I think, predominantly we see the female relationships and how those are great, not so great, but we don't see the bond that most men have in such a loving and caring way. How did you really portray that, and how did you really keep the tone to how that could be and how that could be relatable to a lot of males in society today?
The three of them, they're quite different from one another, and in terms of how they created their friendships, two of them, the cop and the troublemaker. That I'll deal with them. That's Ben and Ferris.
Okay.
Ben he doesn't pity Ferris, but he's scared for him. He doesn't think Ferris is going to make it.
Mm.
And he's and he uses anything as an excuse to kind of hover and stalk the kid almost to make sure he's going to be okay.
Right.
And the kid has several accidents that are intentional to try to kill himself, actually.
Wow.
And he ODs several times. And this
Mm.
cop, he doesn't really know he's gay. Um, he doesn't know that the reason he's caring for this kid is not just out of one human caring for another. He's actually attracted to him, although he doesn't realize this.
Mm.
And so it's one of the
Mm.
reasons he's hovering around him so much, is he actually likes to be around him. He is a
Yeah.
troublemaker, and he's going in many wrong directions, but there's something completely winning about him at the same time.
Yep.
And we've met people like that, the bad guy, the
Mm.
bad boy, who
The bad boy.
nonetheless is just completely irresistible.
Hmm.
And so this kid is kind of irresistible to this cop, and it's only over time does the cop actually understand that his attraction to different male characters in his life is not a terrible thing, is not a bad thing, is not something he should fight. It's something he
Right.
should admit. It's something he should embrace and figure out, what does this mean? And so that's kind
Yeah.
of like his journey. Ferris's journey is just trying to stop being is to embrace life and not be frightened of it.
Yeah.
And then the main character, Eli, who is in and out of their life, he has many different chapters with different people we meet
Hmm.
in his travels through Europe, and he's basically a real. He basically lets his body tell him what he wants to do. He's a seductor. Um, um, he's a sensualist. He's he's very beautiful, and so that has brought many things to him just because he's beautiful. There are people who are
Yeah.
attracted to him only because he's beautiful, and he takes advantage of that in his young life and realizes only later how completely empty that is. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what he has to learn, how to become someone, because it was easy for him. There are
Of
those
course.
people who just find life easy because everything goes their way because they're so attractive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
uh, and so he's had life handed to him fairly easily initially, and then he has to learn how to get beyond that, because there's talk about beauty's only skin deep. I mean, come on, it's like he's got to be more than that. He can't depend on that to
Right.
maintain his relationships. And so that's kind of the track he's on. And meanwhile, he's a performer, um, um, as a singer, as a countertenor.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
the arts are very much a part of his life also. So it's hard for me to encapsulate everything that goes on in the book to some degree. But my website, which is lindsaylaw.net, tells
Hmm.
you a good deal about the book.
Oh,
Um,
great.
so and describes the plot without giving away too much, but it describes it better than I can.
No, I think it's a good description. I think that's really great. Do you talk a little bit about like their external, outside of the three of them? Do you talk about their external friendships or external relationships? Are those things that are kind of highlighted along the way as well? Maybe family or depicting of like other friendships and how this main friendship is probably like the main friendship they have, but then maybe there are other friendships along the way that kind of help them kind of broaden and realize these are my core people. These are who I want to have in my life along the way, which I think a lot of us struggle with sometimes, is having a multitudes of friends and friendships and relationships. But how do you know who's the right ones to stick with and who's the ones you got to maybe let go along the way?
The title comes from the Orphan from Shepherd's Keep. Shepherd's Keep is a town, a fictional
Mhm.
town in northern
Yeah.
Vermont, and
Okay.
he's an orphan in that he is taken to a monastery as a baby, and so his first 15 years of his life, he lives in a monastery with 8 priests.
Hmm.
But those relationships are what form the basis of his growing up.
Okay.
And these are 8 different men who have decided to devote themselves to humanity and to God. And suddenly
Right.
there's this kid that they're bringing up. Some of them never wanted to be around children at all. That's why they chose the life that they've chosen. Anyway,
Wow.
there are many different. So that defines the early relationships he has,
Okay.
and then when he goes to Europe, it's just, again, as I say, he has many love affairs,
Right.
but again, they're just based on his beauty, and eventually, as I
Fizzle
said
out in a
before,
way.
he has to learn to be better than that.
Mhm.
Sorry, I've suddenly lost track of the question.
No, you're fine. No, you're describing a little bit of, you talked about a little bit of his
Other
upbringing.
relationships that they have, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
It's.
that's
I mean,
great.
Ben learns a lot because he had terrible, terrible parents. They were
Mhm.
crooks, actually. They
Oh,
were. They broke the law, um,
okay.
and he was. That's how he was brought up. Um,
Wow.
and it was like beyond tough love. They were terrible to him, which
Yeah.
is why he's desperate to get out of town, and he eventually goes to college, um, um, in the South, just to get away from home.
Wow.
So, but again, there's also an element of it. All three of them being brought up in this area of Vermont is very rural with a
Right.
very small population of people.
Yeah.
And so when each of them experiences life outside these tiny rural towns,
Hmm.
that also becomes a whole element in terms of who are they.
Of
Um,
course.
and it's a
Yeah.
kind of background. They're the kind of towns we don't really see all that often anymore. But again, as I said, the story begins in the 80s and the 90s. And these
Right.
tiny towns where, there's 100, 200 people is the population of these towns.
Wow.
So that's very much the backbone of each of these three people comes from
I love that.
rural
Yeah.
America.
Yeah. That's so great. Now, lastly, Lindsay, as a first-time novelist, what did you find most surprising or rewarding about writing the book?
Ah, um, I thought it would never be over.
Fair, fair, fair.
I'm big on rewriting, and the question is, you've got to finally determine, am I finished yet? I
Right.
rewrite like crazy, and I read
Mm,
it aloud to myself. I read it as a reader, trying to think.
right.
And I said, and the minute I hear something that seems false, I have to quickly stop and change it. So
Hmm.
I was surprised by how long that process takes. Also, that the world these days, I mean, forever and again, the whole period I was growing up, there were a handful of publishers based in
Hmm.
New York City.
Right.
There were many agents out there who would try to connect you, an author, with a publisher in New York, and that just, I mean, and that model still exists, but that model never really changed or improved. And there
Right.
were whole other voices out there that were not being listened to by these people. And they've come up with their own way to reach their own readers, and that's through self-publishing, which is why I
Yeah.
think there's a diversity of voices now that's available in bookshops. That is because of self-publishing. Um,
Yeah.
um, um, and so that's been a huge change. So this book I've self-published. Um, I've worked with marketing people to get on to get to book clubs, to get on podcasts, to
Yeah.
to have websites. I mean, you find whole new ways of reaching your readership, which is very
Yep.
different than how publishers do it.
Right.
The established publishers do it.
Right. Right.
And so and then of course it's all through Amazon, because Amazon, whether we like them or not,
Runs the world. Yes, we know.
runs the world, and they're responsible for nearly 90% of all books sold go
Wow.
through Amazon. So
Wow.
what first and foremost, you want to get your book on Amazon.
Yeah.
You want
Yeah.
readers to come back to Amazon, and you want readers to give you a good rating, because
Right.
that's how you sell books. So it's very different than how it used to be. And so
Yeah.
that's been a huge learning experience for me, but also fascinating. And in the end, you want people to read it, so you'll do anything you can to get the book out there.
Of course.
I
Yeah.
sent free copies to about 30, almost 40 different gay bookshops in cities all over the country. saying, "Please read this, and if you like it, order copies for your shop because I think your readers will like it." So
Yeah.
it's all been fascinating.
That's amazing. I'm so excited for you. And what kind of advice would you give any aspiring authors looking to embark on this or their literary journey?
Ah, um, I didn't take this route myself, but uh, because I had worked with as my job, I'd worked with so many writers. But I mean, that isn't going to be the normal path that other people take. And I
Hmm.
think writers school. I think taking classes, frankly, and going to these universities that are teaching, fiction writing or journal writing or nonfiction writing, or
Right.
all of those things um, help enormously. Um, Also, talking to other writers, going to as many. I mean, there are writers' workshops that are, I
Hmm.
think, extremely helpful. Um, you don't necessarily have to go to college to study writing, but there are many workshops that are just summer workshops that many colleges host summer programs. Uh,
Yeah.
and so all of those things are good. And you want to meet other writers. How are you doing this? And you want to be reading other people's material, and you want other people to read your material. You've got
Hmm.
to have people reading your work.
Absolutely.
It can't just be family and spouses because it's their job to be supportive. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're being honest.
You be,
You want
yeah.
you
Well,
want you want you
yeah.
want you want other people saying, "Well, this does," and editors. I mean, the thing that saved me was I found a very good and very knowledgeable editor early on,
Amazing.
and she was just an enormous help. And she would read 3 and 4 drafts of the book. So that's all of these things are useful for writers to try to follow through on. Um,
Yeah.
and again, depending what state you live in and what university is near you, it is more than likely that there's a summer writers workshop somewhere
Yeah.
near anybody, wherever you live.
I think that's so great. Yeah, we think that it's almost like you don't have the resources, but I think nowadays it's becoming so common that you do have these creative outlets and places to go and to have these programs and to have these kind of peer and support groups. I think during COVID, I did a screenwriting class and it was just something to do because of COVID.
Yeah.
And it was just great to be able just to like tell a story or talk about a story or get ideas or just be able just to collaborate and just communicate via Zoom, obviously, but still have that sense of community and have other people read your stuff and read it out loud and getting that feedback and being scared and pushing yourself, which I thought
Yes.
was always so great. So it's so great that you mentioned that and knowing that people can have these options out there for them, which is really great. I love that. Yeah.
There's a wonderful movie out. Well, actually, I guess it's probably not out any longer, but that came out a few months ago called American Fiction. Um,
Oh, I
and
love
it's
that
a
movie.
terrific
So
movie, and it
so
shows
good.
you in a wonderful light. It shows you the publishing world and the writing world.
Yeah,
Um,
it
um,
did.
um,
Yeah.
and But it's a wonderful movie.
Yeah. No, I loved it. It was so good. Well acted, written, all above
Yeah,
it. Well,
yeah,
obviously won an
and very
Oscar, so
very surprising.
yeah. Um, well, yeah, Lindsay, it's been so great. Now, how do you feel about, how things are happening in the world of, literature for the LGBTQ plus community? And rather it be, this, I'm actually going back to your background in television and theater and film. How do you feel that representation is happening now? And are you really happy kind of seeing these stories evolve and grow far more than what they used to be years ago?
Yes, there are huge differences in terms of the largest change in the past decade has been streaming television. Um,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
and it's a terrible word, but it is the word we all use now. Content. Everyone's looking
Hmm.
for content, um,
Yeah.
um, and with the Netflixes of the world, they have there used to be 3 networks, and
Yeah.
and that represented three, people's taste, frankly.
Mm.
And now there's scores of networks, and they need lots of material. And people are accustomed to seeing a huge variety of stories on their televisions, and not just the silly same sitcoms and the silly same police detective dramas and blah blah blah.
Right.
And the great thing that streaming has also brought to us is storytelling from around the world, as opposed to three American networks.
Yes.
Suddenly being able to see a police drama that's set in Czechoslovakia, which is wildly different than one set in America, because it's different people creating it, it can be a wonderful thing. I think that the opportunities. I mean, all of these streaming services are trying to distinguish themselves from one another, and they thus they pick a wild array of diverse programming. And I don't think there's any limit to what they put on at all. I mean, there are great gay stories being told out there. There are great stories of other marginalized communities that are just out there front and center. And it's not some special little, it's like Black History Month. It's not like, oh, okay, let's take a month and do that.
Right, exactly.
No, let's do this all the time. And so I think the opportunities are spectacular. And
I agree.
Gay readers looking for gay material to read. I mean, they can find it. When I was a teenager and in my 20s and 30s, there was no way even to find what little there was. There was no way to find it, unless you. There was no way to find it. And now it's because of the internet. Of course, you can search out anything you want to search out. You can find gay novels. You can find. Anyway, I think it's a thrilling world out there at the moment. People just dive right into it.
No, it's true. Yeah. And, I let my listeners know, like, there's always a outlet, whether you're gay, straight, whatever case may be, there's always an outlet. And there's always a representation. As you mentioned with streaming and content, there's always levels of representation that's there, and everyone feels more connected, for that. And I think it's so great with writers like yourself and other people putting their stories out there, and be able to have that platform has been amazing. And it's sad that it took so long for us to get there. Not saying we're all there now, but it's a progression that's heading in the right direction. And I think it's so sad that we still live in this divided world where it's almost like you're shunned upon for even trying to even think outside the box of normality. And it's like, yeah, but that's life. We're not all the same. We're all different people. Like, that's how things go, but you always have those naysayers. And so I'm sure, you always feel that you kind of maybe feel in the back of your head. But I think what's so great is that I feel like you just didn't care about that. You just wrote the story that you cared about. It didn't. And like you said, it didn't focus on the fact they were gay characters. It was the fact they were characters, but happened to be gay. But it was also the fact of, like, it's something that everyone could relate to, gay or straight. This is a friendship and bond that went on for many years that I think people look past that and realize that's what the core of the story is about. And I love that you were able to do that. That's really great. Lindsay, where can people find out more about you? Do you mention your website? Where else can we find out more?
I'll spell it, because people don't always spell Lindsay the right way, but it's Lindsay Law, which is LINDSAYLAW. LindsayLaw.net is the website.
.net.
The book, The Orphan from Shepard's Keep, the book is available on Amazon in the Kindle format, in paperback, and in hardback. And that's how to find the book and how to find me.
Perfect. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for sitting with us and, we're all sitting, but coming on and talking with us and letting us in a little bit into your world and really talking about the novel. Obviously, it's doing well, and I'm happy for all your success. And do you have any inspirations to either continue the story or work on other works? Is anything else you're kind of pondering about?
I'm working on a new novel, although I got a note the other night from a friend of mine who had just finished this book, and she said, "I certainly hope you're planning a sequel. I want to know what happens to them now."
That's amazing.
So that had not been in my thinking, but it did make me laugh.
Sometimes that's how stories work. You build something, and next thing you know, it's people want more. The demand comes, and then you got to make it happen. But Obviously,
Right.
I'm sure if you do decide to do it, it'll be amazing if you decide to do it. Which I'm sure you probably will.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks.
Of course. Thank you. Always a pleasure. And let us know when the next book comes, because we want to do that.
No, we're gonna stay on here while you tell me how to do the pod match thing.
Yes.
Did I not have said that?
I'm gonna help you through the process of what pod match is. Yes.
Sorry.
No. Hey, listen, it's all about helping one another, right? That's how we do things around. You know?